I was asked to introduce Omar Gallaga from the, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I had to ask, from the Pointer Institute, and he's going to be presenting today on deconstructed salad writing for different platforms. And when I saw that, I was really intrigued, and he and I have been up here chatting a little bit. I'm pretty passionate about writing, and something that I've been tasked with back at Swanson Russell is trying to mentor some of the younger PR folks about writing in particular, because it is it's such an art, but you know, there's so many things that go into it that are not just grammar and spelling and punctuation, but flow and feel and how to capture your audience and appeal to that audience. And so I'm really excited to see Omar's presentation today. So I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's a technology culture writer. He's worked freelance for some pretty big names in the news business, NPR, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and many others. And he worked as an editor, a writer, and a podcaster for over 20 years, more than 20 years, I should say. Founding editor of Spanish language newspaper, and works with Pointer on diversity training and advising young journalists on starting their careers, which again, that perks my ears up, because I told him I'm just going to copy this whole presentation and have to give it to some of our kids back at the office, because I have to do that this fall, I guess, come up with something. So maybe I'll steal something from Omar. He currently freelances for Texas Monthly and The Guardian, writes about technology and fun things like dating apps, blockchain applications, and impacting the environment and cybersecurity. Also, you can hear him every week on the Texas Standard radio program discussing technology. Please join me in welcoming Omar Gallaga.
You're saying something that I'm like, that should have been in my slides. Talk to you first.
I think we consulted with for a small fee.
Have to get out of my feet. Good morning, everybody. So before we start, I just wanted to let you know there is going to be a couple writing exercises we're going to do. So you want to probably have some paper and pen handy, or if you're comfortable writing on your phone, you guys see some laptops, you want to do it on your laptop, totally fine, however you want to do it. But I am going to ask a couple of you to read some of the things that you wrote. And we've got a microphone up here that we'll do that with, but really this whole, I got like two mics up here at the same time. Can you hear me okay with just this mic? Okay,
yes.
I'll just do this one. So yeah, this really only works if everybody, or most of you, kind of buy in and participate. So I want to make this fun and light. There's nothing heavy here, so let's just try to have some fun. And even the name of this presentation, Deconstructed Salad, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything at all. It's just we're just going to deconstruct writing and kind of break it down and talk about, you know, what are the components of good writing, what are some ways you could maybe improve, and I think a lot of it just comes down to just thinking about what you're writing and what you're trying to accomplish with it. So let's get right into it. Yeah, I'm Omar Gallaga. I'm from Texas. I live in New Braunfels, Texas, which is halfway between Austin and San Antonio. I love it there. So my primary job over my career has been tech journalist. I write for places like I worked at the Austin American-Statesman for 21 years, did everything you could possibly do there, including podcasting and writing. Basically, I write for where people pay me to write fun tech stuff. So I've also worked on a lot of web projects, things like podcasts, video, even comic strips. So the way this is going to break down is we're going to do, actually, I should get our agenda. Here's what we'll be talking about today. We're going to discuss mindfulness and trusting your voice. We're going to talk about figuring out your audience, which I think is really key. You got to know who you're writing for and who you're trying to target. And we're going to talk about podcasts. I just heard in the last session, there's a lot of interest in podcasts. So we're going to do an exercise kind of like, even if you have no interest in podcasts, okay, what's one that you would like to listen to then if you don't want to make one? But we're going to kind of go through the steps of what's involved. I've done a couple of them, and it's a lot of work, and it shakes people out very quickly, because it's like after the third episode, they're like, this is a lot of work. I don't want to keep doing this. How long am I supposed to do this forever? No. So we're going to talk about that and kind of how to maintain podcasts once it's, because I think that's the hardest part is once you get it off the ground, how do you keep doing it every week for like forever? That's a whole other challenge, making a podcast. And we're also here. There we go. And then fun writing exercises. So have some pen and paper handy, because we're going to have one real soon. There'll be a break in between. We're going for 2 hours, and we'll have a break in there in the writing exercise. We get that early. You can check your stocks, whatever you need to do. So I'm going to start by asking you this question, because we were just talking about it here a second ago. Do you love to write? And it's okay if you don't. it won't offend me if you don't. Me, I love to write. I love words. I love the zone that I go into when I'm writing something and it's clicking. So why don't I write all the time? Like I should be writing, I should be up in my hotel room right now, like crafting a novel or something. It's because I also hate writing. I also hate the part where I actually have to sit down and do it. I procrastinate, I do my dishes, I vacuum, I clean the tub and the toilet. It's like just to not be writing. Because it's always, that's the hardest part, is just sitting down under mud and getting started. That always is the part that I have to get over in order to get to, and deadlines help. For me, I can't work without a deadline. But I love it when I'm actually writing. I love it when I've written something and it's done and I can look at it, look it over, even if it's something that's terrible. I still like that process of having done it. I lead up to it. It's hard. So that's my relationship to writing. But I recognize that not everyone enjoys any of those parts. I know that for some people, it's like going to the dentist or being assigned homework or being forced to be a rocket of creativity when you're really not feeling it. So that's kind of what I want to ask for, just a show of hands. Do you love writing? How many people love writing? Okay. Let's do it. Half. How many hate writing? Just can't. Just wish you never had to do it. Okay.
Russ.
Pretty okay. So we're here for you too. Don't worry. So I think the first thing that I think you should think about when you're approaching writing, or just thinking about how you write in general, is or any new piece of writing, whether it's for a magazine, a website, a podcast, anything. Think about what you have to offer. What do you bring to the writing that you're going to be doing? Maybe that's unique to you, that nobody else has that perspective. So it might be your personality. Maybe you have a great personality and it comes across when you're writing. Maybe you have a deep knowledge of the subject area. Maybe you own that area of knowledge, even online, where no one else knows as much about a subject as you do, or people that have deep knowledge of something. Get that across. That's a big skill. Reporters, that's kind of what we're supposed to do. Reporters is find those sources and get the best knowledge. A way with words. I mean, you can disguise a lack of information with really good writing. You'd be surprised. I read a lot of stories, and even in like the New York Times, where I'm like, there's not much in this story, but damn, they wrote the hell out of it. It's great writing, but there's nothing here. A different point of view, I think there's going to be a whole section of this presentation about writing for diversity. Pointer, who I don't actually work for Pointer. I'm not an employee of Pointer, but I do a lot of work for them. We do a lot of diversity training. And part of that has been talking to TV stations across. There's a network of TV stations that people I know the name if I told you, but I'm not allowed to. And they own a bunch of TV stations across the country. So we've been doing these diversity presentations with the staffs of, 200 people at a time in Zoom calls, and talking about who's your audience, how do you expand that audience, how do you become more aware of these issues of diversity, intersectionality. And it's been really eye-opening. I mean, I've learned so much in the last 6 months doing these presentations. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. That this presentation is not about diversity, but I think it's something because I think it's really important. And bringing different points of view into your writing, or bringing in people who have different points of view into writing if you're an organization, I think that's super critical right now. And so it's something that I'm going to share some pointer slides that we've been. Don't that I shared these with you, but there's some stuff that we've been sharing that I think is really illuminating. It doesn't come from me, it comes directly from Doris Strong and Pointer, which is brilliant. Good sourcing and research. Like I said, if you're a reporter, that's sort of your job, is to kind of get the best information from the best sources. And if you have a good source list, really great work. Enthusiasm. That's one I never hear talked about with writing. It's like you can make up for a lot of lack of information and poor writing by just being enthusiastic about it. If you're having a blast writing something, it does come across. And if you're miserable writing something, that also comes across. So I always tell people, like, if you're not having fun, if you're not engaged, your readers are not going to be engaged, because they're gonna know. So we're going to start with a quick 5-minute writing exercise. Just 3 sentences. I'm going to start real small. You can do it on your laptop or phone, or write it down wherever you want it. In 1 sentence, who are you? And I'm going to call in a couple of you. So quickly. Do you enjoy writing? You can just say yes or no, or you can say why you or don't enjoy writing. And hold it right off the slide. What do you bring to your writing? like those things I talked about, enthusiasm, point of view, like what is it about you that you bring to the writing? So we're gonna take 5 minutes, I'll time it. And I will let you know when we're running out of time.
So 3 sentences per question or?
1 sentence per question.
Okay.
3 sentences total. 1 extra credit. And then I'm gonna ask a couple of you to take the mic and. Getting close to the halfway mark. So we got about 2.5 minutes. think I about one. I should have said don't overthink it, but now it's too late. You're like overthinking it right now. Why? What does he mean? Another 30 seconds. Okay, we'll wrap up there. So first, let's ask for volunteers, but we don't get any of these. One. Say where you are, you're fine.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm Valerie Smith. I'm with Sox Solutions. sausage. And I've always loved writing, like creative writing, like poetry to just informational writing. I've also enjoyed tech. And we're going to, I answered when it comes to my writing, I like to structure it. So a little bit of text writing, technical knowledge. That's what I. And I also have a lot of passion.
Passion for what?
Passion for nature, plants, and animals.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, structure is, we'll talk about that a little bit. I started as a very unstructured writer. I would just sit down and just blah, just whatever. And over the years, I've become much more structured. Now, if I do a big story, I have to have, this is ridiculous. No one does this. But I have to transcribe every interview I do. I use Trent, but then I go back in and clean it up because it's always words messed up. I go through the transcript, go listen to it at like 1.4 speed and clean it up, print it out, the interview that with the I highlighted as I'm doing that, print it out. I have to have all the interviews in front of me in a stack of papers, all paper clipped. And then I write my story from those notes. And I mean, the last story I did for Texas Monthly had about, I would say 70 pages of notes like that, of all just flipping through them. That's just my process, and that's ridiculous. Most reporters.
Highlighting.
I highlight in Trent and it prints out highlighted, which is awesome, and then that is completely cumbersome, and you should never have to do that. But then when I actually sit down to write the story, like it's fast, like I get it done in like 2 hours, just from that I have everything in front of me, it's organized, and I know where. That's over structure. So let's go hear a couple more.
Hi, I'm Darius Lane. I'm the Small Ag and Turf Yard Manager for John Deere. For number one, I put, this is something I kind of use as a signature, but life is an education. So I majored in father and husband. Number two, do you enjoy writing? I said, if you're asking a hip hop writer, poet, short story scriber, creative writing undergrad, advertising copywriter, if he likes to write. And then last one I put all the positives.
And speaking of structure from before, I wrote like one sentence for each in order, and I thought that I was just supposed to read all three, so that's what I'm going to do. 'Cause that's how I interpreted the assignment. So here are my 3 sentences. I'm Scott Cavelli, a beloved child of God, saved by grace. I love to write because it's a way to connect people and tell stories, and I feel like I can relate to people well, and I bring that to my writing.
That's it. Hey, gentlemen over here.
I'm John Kiger with TurfNet, and I'm someone who is passionate about getting facts right in the content. And I enjoy writing as it helps me focus on the message and allows me to share my thoughts and observations with others. And I bring a passion for correct spelling, grammar, and presentation to my writing. And I expect that from those whose content I read. And I'd also like to add that in addition to writing, I also do quite a bit of radio work as a sideline in both podcasts within TurfNet and music radio show that I do. So I'm passionate for interviewing, and I've been told from the people that I interview, particularly on the music side, that I'm really good at asking the questions that haven't been asked and getting some responses and some content that I don't expect, they don't expect to give, and the listeners don't expect to receive.
And I'm hearing things that I should have put in the podcast section of the presentation. Like, yeah, that's just interviewing. That should but yeah, interviewing is key for podcasting. And I've listened to so many podcasts where the interviewer asks questions that are much longer than the answers, and that's always like a red flag. Like if your answers are long, questions are longer than the answers, and you're not giving space to speak, like that's not good. That's fantastic. I want to hear from somebody that hates to write or doesn't like to write. Is there anybody that can talk about that? Everyone so far loves to write. I want to hear thinks it's torture.
Okay, well, I put number one, well, I answered number 2 and 3 first, and then I answered number 1 at the last second. So I am an
You needed to print it
overthinker.
out and put, that's like.
Yeah. I'm an overthinker. Do you enjoy writing? I selectively enjoy writing, which Scott knows. And then what do you bring to writing? I bring enthusiasm, and I think that I bring practice. I don't like to put like a lot of extra into my writing. I just kind of like to get to the point. So
Enthusiasm, I mean, I like I said, enthusiasm is underrated because if I'm having fun writing a story, you're gonna have fun reading it. And my people that know my writing, that are friends of mine or that follow my stuff, like they can tell when I hated writing the story. They're like, oh, this is miserable for you to write that one. Like, sounds like you're bored. I'm like, yeah.
I was a
I got
newspaper
paid.
reporter for a while, and I figured out quick that was not.
Yeah, and it's hard to be, as a reporter especially, like it's hard to have fun doing assignments because your editors don't want you to have fun. They want you to just get it done. If they don't like it. If they see you having fun, they think you're off. They don't think you're doing your job. So I struggled with that my whole career. It's like, I want to have fun writing. They're like, no. So let's move on from there. Oh, we already heard from you. So I want you to each think about the last piece of writing that you read that really you or that really affected you, whether it was a book or an article or a poem, whatever. Why did it have that impact? What about it stuck with you? Was it that it had a memorable narrative or story? And I'm not going to get into the whole detour that we do in our pointer presentations, but you can throw facts and figures at people all day. And I told this to a lot of TV people who love to rattle off data and graphs and facts. Like that stuff is important, but what really matters is the narrative, story. People will remember a story, they will not remember facts and figures. Humor. Humor is a very, very good tool to have in your toolbox, even if you're not funny. You can interview people who are funny. You can bring in humor in other ways. Or I think really good point for good writing. Characters, and that doesn't mean making up characters. That can be just people you interview or you're writing about. Even a press release, if you're writing about the CEO of a company that you represent, is that person really interesting? Like make them interesting, make them seem interesting. What is it about them that's different or unique? I see so many press releases that are just rattling off data, information. We just hired this new CEO. He's so and so. He comes from this company. He's had this many years of experience. Okay, well, tell me something about him that I can't just look up online. Something really interesting that only you know about them because you've been spending all this time talking to them for pre-interview. Make it interesting. Make that person interesting. Characters are important. Unique or skilled use of language, and like I said, like the way enthusiasm can make up for a lot, so can good use of language. I mean, if you're really good with metaphors, if you're really good with crafting, drawing people into your writing, that's an important skill. That's something that takes a lot of practice. And connection with the reader, and sometimes that's just from the subject matter. If you're writing about a family that had, 3 people in their family died of COVID, and you're talking to them about it, like that's compelling, and it's going to connect with a lot of people. Timeliness is important. If something just happened and you're writing something about it and it's topical and everybody's talking about it, that's important. Relatability, I think we sometimes forget that is this something that's going to connect with your audience? Is it something that we're going to identify with? Is this completely out of the realm of your audience's worldview? I see a lot of tech publications do. Is a pet peeve of mine. Gift guides. They do these like holiday gift guides. Like, 50, 10 gifts for your Brad or dad or whatever, like June or for the holidays. And it's like, buy them a $3,000 boombox. I'm like, what? Like that always drives me nuts when I see like that's not something anyone I know would ever buy for anyone else, for like that's graduating from high school, like $3,000 gift. No. So know who your audience is and what you're writing is relevant to. They're all elements. There's lots of other things that make good writing, but these are the ones that just kind of struck me. And emotion. Emotion is something that whether it's just the nature of what you're writing about or just if it's something personal to you that you're writing about, dealt with it and you're conveying those emotions, that is another really strong way. And this graphic, I just saw it yesterday. Like I was kind of going over the slides last night and I was like, oh, this is really good. Information is not the same as a story. Data is not the same as a story. Somebody posted this on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, that is exactly right. Stories are more memorable. Stories tell the whole picture. Just throwing data or facts or a graphic out there with no context doesn't really. So that's just nothing to do with the rest of the presentation. I just thought that was graphic. And with all that in mind, even if all the planets align, and even if you love writing, like some of us in the room do, writing is still work. I've been writing for going on, 35 years for publication, and I still struggle with it. I still have to remember good habits and not fall into bad habits. Knowing what you're going to write and from whose point of view. Sometimes I'll dive into an assignment without really thinking about it, and then realize halfway, like that's not really the right point of view, or that's not really what I'm going for. So it really got to have a plan when you start writing. What is this for? What am I trying to accomplish? Even first draft writers should revise and revisit whenever possible. I come from a newspaper background, so I'm so used to writing something on deadline, turning it in. An editor looks at it and then boom, it's gone. Like I don't look at it again. I might spot something later where I'm like, oh, we got to fix it before it goes to press. But I've always been a first draft writer. In the last couple of years since I left the newspaper, I really had to educate myself on, oh no, I need to look at this again. I need to revise, and I need multiple drafts, because the first draft, as good as it might be, is not perfect. Always mindful of that the first draft is never gold. It might be 80% there, but that's still not the same as where you want it to be. Not everything is a masterpiece, but you should care about what you're writing about and be authentic. If you don't care, even with the reader, like I said, if you're not enthusiastic, you're bored by what you're writing, that comes across and your reader don't know it. So really gotta at least care about it. There's some types of writing you just are never going to be a masterpiece, or never going to be super interesting, but you should at least care that it's accurate. You should at least care that you're getting it right. You should care that it's well structured. Those are just the basics of what you do. And be mindful of who's in your audience. You may know who your target audience is, you may not. Maybe writing for a publication or putting out something that you don't know exactly who it's going to go to. You don't know exactly how wide the reach that it's going to be. But it's something to be thinking about. And if you don't know, then that's something you should be researching. Either doing some market research or asking whoever client is or whoever you're writing for, like, who's our audience, who's this for, and at least have that conversation. And the practical stuff, whether it's a novel, a press release, a piece of text on a billboard, is it spelled right, grammatically correct, is it factual and accurate? And this one I also don't hear about very often. Does it pass the gut check? Is there anything about it that could be taken the wrong way or out of context? Is there something, should you get someone else's perspective before you put it out into the world? And I goes to some of the diversity stuff we're going to be talking about. If it's out of your worldview and you're not sure if it's something that could be offensive or it could be problematic, like you need to ask somebody. You need to check with someone, because if your gut is telling you, I don't know about this, then don't put it out there and go that.
Yeah, I think that's important with quotes too. Like, would this person want this to be printed? They said it during the interview. That's something I always have to think about. I probably wouldn't want somebody to know I said that sometimes. So
yeah,
that's an important gut checking.
Not everybody. Depending on what medium or what you're writing for, you don't have to stick to like the rules of golden standard rules all the time. But like my rule is always, I can't show you the article that I'm writing. If you're in it, if I quoted you or your source, I can't show you the article where published, but I can read back your quotes. Like I can, tell you exactly what you said that I'm quoting, but that's as far as I go. Some publications that I've written for, Texas Hospitals Association, that's an example. They will send the story to the doctors that I interviewed, nurses that I interviewed. They want to be accurate. They're like, Omar doesn't know anything about hospitals or medicine. Like, run it by the doctors, because if they spot a mistake or a word, or I didn't get the right medicine, the right treatment name correct, they'll spot that. So that's a special case where their expertise is way better than mine. But in general, I don't show sources the whole story, because then it's like, oh, I don't really like the way that. Oh, you start getting that, and it's like, oh no, I've got to rewrite the whole thing. If you're writing a press release for a client, though, that's a whole other. That's probably not the same. To answer your question. There's a lot of, we can talk about as far as nuts and bolts of writing it and a little bit more of that in a moment. Exercise. But before we get to that, I want to talk about audience. This year, like I said in the beginning, I've been doing a lot of diversity training pointer and talking to a lot of TV stations and publications. And you'd be surprised at how often they put out stories and web articles, and videos and tweets. And we're talking about like major market TV stations and pretty big tech publications that they've heard of. And they do it without really thinking about who's going to read it or how it might impact people, or how, you know, on the flip side, how it might expand their reach. And so that's a good thing to kind of seek out for new audience. So with that in mind, I'm going to share some of this stuff from Pointer and about knowing your audience. So this is new data that's just, I think, this month, or no, sorry, August. In August was just released by the Census Bureau. They've been putting this data together since last year. So 43% of Americans come from diverse backgrounds, up from 34% in 2010. We had preliminary data since last year that kind of suggested this is the way it was going to go, but we actually now have the final data from the Census Bureau about this. So more than 4 in 10 people in the United States are people of color, but race and ethnicity are just one aspect of writing for a diverse and changing audience. When you write for a mass audience, even for a single client that is a large number of people, you should consider that writing in a way that considers diversity could mean a lot of different things. We always sort of frame it in, you know, race and diversity, but there's a lot of other elements of what diversity is. Diversity beyond race and gender includes sexual orientation, age, generation, physical ability and disability, political beliefs, neurodiversity. That's a pretty big list, and then it goes on from there even more. Intersectionality, body shape, geography. One that I don't hear a lot about is military. My dad is an Air Force veteran, and we in journalism, I think only 2% of journalists have military experience, but 7% of Americans have served. So there's sort of a disconnect between people in the journalism industry and people who actually serve in the military. And what I find from working in the industry is that we will talk to military personnel when it's a military story, when it's about the military or about issues facing service people. We never talk to military people just for any random story, like unless they just happen to be serving. So like that's an area where it's like, oh wow, that is kind of an area that we sort of miss. Housing status, whether people rent or buy, immigration status, passport is one that I had never thought of until I started doing these presentations. There's a certain level of privilege involved in even having a passport, being able to pay for a passport and have access to travel to other countries. Like that, there's privilege there. Not everybody has a passport or can get one. So that's an area that I never think about it as far as diversity. And then vulnerable populations, and I know this may be completely out of the scope of the kinds of things that you write about, but I think it's still something about is groups that are at varying degrees of risk for whatever reason, which women, people of color, and then, you know, in the workplace, interns, freelancers, contractors. We were all remote workers last year, not still. People subject to ageism, anyone with parity. And what I find is that some of these, especially this list on the right, you may not know these things about someone until you talk to them, until you actually do the interview and are speaking to them where these issues come out, and things where you wouldn't know necessarily looking at someone that they, you know, have survived trauma or that they're driven by a subject matter. These are things that come up in conversation, and then you got to figure out how to deal with that or whether that's relevant to what you're writing. Again, not totally germane to all writing, but just stuff to think about. So let's take from that, you know, writing with the audience in mind. Even if your audience is small or highly targeted, we should still be mindful of diversity within that audience. And are you trying to expand your core audience? I mean, maybe you have a core audience that reads your publication or your press releases, and that's the only people that are ever going to read it, and you only have to worry about that audience, and that's totally fine. But if you're trying to expand that audience, if you're trying to grow that audience, trying to grow a publication or expand who your clients are, or expand the reach of a podcast or any other kind of writing, then it's something to think about. It's think about where the person numbers are going, that audience is, and how to reach them. That's very critical right now. And who is your ideal reader? And is it different from your actual reader? Is who your current reader is now different from where you want to be? You need to shift content in a certain direction to attract, you know, whether it's a more affluent reader, whether it's a younger reader or an older reader. I mean, I don't know where you want to land. But it's something to think about because content really matters. Knowing who you're trying to reach, you're trying to get. And if your content doesn't reflect that, you're not going to draw your audience in that direction. And to that, market research, there's professionals who know way better than I do how to do that, how to, in even subtle ways, kind of pivot your content in that direction. And what do you want that audience member to come away with? Just as you want to know, like, what do you bring to your writing? What is it about the writing that you're doing that you want to come away with? You want them to learn, you want them to be entertained, you want them to just be engaged with the content, if it's marketing, and engaged with the brand. It just really depends on what your goal is. But don't go into any kind of writing, especially a major writing project, without knowing what your ultimate goal is. So we come to the next writing exercise. This is longer. It's going to be 3 or 4 paragraphs instead of sentences. And I'm going to give you some more time to do that. Again, don't overthink it. Do your best. So what's the most interesting, funny, significant, or surprising thing that happened to you, or it's someone you know, or that you witnessed in the month of August? Think back to August, the whole month. What was the most interesting thing you were talking about the most? Telling everybody about it, or posting online about. Bring your unique talents to the table. The stuff we talked about earlier. What is it that you bring to your writing? So focus on that. To write a story for a specific audience member, the person you want to write this story for. Be as creative as you like. Do whatever. No rules. But I do want you to have a person in mind that you're writing this for. And that doesn't mean write it like a letter or say dear so-and-so. That you don't have to do that. That's not what I mean. But in your mind, be thinking about who's my ideal target for this piece of writing. What I want to read the most. Could be someone, a friend, could be a coworker, could be your boss, whoever like to read this piece of writing and be impressed by it. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to brainstorm an idea, think about what you want to write, and then we're going to do, I don't know, do we need 20 minutes or should we do 15?
15.
Let's do 15.
15.
Did something happen this month in September?
That's 2 days.
Okay.
These are very loose
I feel like
rules.
you have a lot better.
If something really amazing happened in July, write about it. I'm just trying to give you a box so you don't like, oh no.
No, that's fair. That's totally fair.
So yeah, July is perfect. If there's something more interesting happening in July, write about the July most interesting thing.
Okay.
And have fun. Have fun with this. This is not meant to be drudgery. Have a good time doing it. So let's do 3 minutes to think about an idea, and then we'll just do 15 minutes. We're probably gonna run out of time. I'll start the timer. You got 3 minutes to brainstorm. And there's going to be a break after this, so you got to go to the bathroom or whatever.
Volunteers this time.
Yeah, I want you somebody to read this girl. And just to take the sting out of it, I'll read mine. But I was going to annotate it, scratch it out. Right after great investments. You've got about 1 minute left to brainstorm. Want to start writing early. Stop. Okay, that's your brainstorm time. 15 minutes to write. You need to write, go to the bathroom or something, but there will be a break after we read this thing out. So. It's starting now. Yes.
Well, we're doing a writing exercise, but they can come in. Yeah, yeah, they can come in and do that.
Okay, I think we're at about time. Everybody gets minute. It's okay if it's happening. I won't judge. So I want to have a couple of you read it. Just maybe just 2 people would read. Got one volunteer over here. Several volunteers. We might be here for a while. Okay.
Sorry.
Got one over here.
Was it?
Here we go.
All right, this is. Can you hear me?
You can have to speak like right at it.
Okay, is that better? Okay. All right, my parents are building their dream house in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. They're truly building it, blasting plaster, stripping it to the studs, and hammering out concrete and tile. In June, I went to help them. I drove over 8 hours, listened to 3 podcast episodes about books I may never read, and lost my voice belting Mariah Carey and Janet Jackson as I sped down Highway 85. Why is this the most interesting thing that happened to me in the month of June? Well, I can start by asking who's truly doing anything interesting in the middle of a global pandemic. However, given our setting, I'll check the bitter sarcasm at the door. This was the most memorable thing I did in June simply because I love my family, and I don't see them nearly enough. Plus, quite frankly, given the circumstances, again, living in a pandemic, spending more time in my rental than I ever planned when I rented the place, and again, living during a pandemic, cannot stress this enough. Driving 8 hours at the crack of dawn to see faces I love more than my own and blasting plaster was cathartic in a way I never expected. I could say more about what I did there, how many walls I felled, the cracked baseboards and moldy carpet that yielded to my crowbar and razor blade, but that's not what I cared about. I want to tell you about my mother's satisfied smile and the sweat on my stepdad's brow, the love being painstakingly nailed into that old yet brand new house.
So what did you bring to that? Do you think?
Just, I don't know, just how much love I felt in that moment. Over the summer, I generally see my family around December and then maybe once another time in the year. So I try to see them in the summer. But sometimes I just really miss them. I really wanted to go down and see them, and I didn't care what they were doing or if we were going to do anything fun at all. So when I wrote this, I really just wanted to put that emotion into it. And I wanted to make it as descriptive as possible so that you guys could feel it too. It really was, I don't know, it was just, it was a great time. And literally all I did was sweat all day. I came back to North Carolina extremely sore, but I don't know, very pleased.
So what I got out of it was you learned a little bit about your personality. You learned about your family. You connected with us with emotion. You connected with us with great details, a lot of detail, and not just we did plaster. I mean, you describe it, great use of wording, and just very relatable. Like we're all kind of feeling that right now. So it's the one.
So the audience is my kid's 4th grade teacher this school year. The headline is "Your Most Cultured Student in School Year." So here's the story. Each year, I'm sure you're anxious to know which kid will be your brightest, your most talkative, your most misbehaved, or maybe the most absent. Well, I can certainly tell you who will be the most cultured is our son Preston. When you meet him, one of the first things he's likely to mention is his daily routine of sitting at the swimmer pool bar drinking strawberry daiquiris while we vacation in Cancun. I mean, what 9-year-old wouldn't want to chat about? You'd be impressed by his understanding of etiquette as a step the bartender as well. Now, before you call DFS or some other local child care assistant, know that these daiquiris were a virgin, at least to the best of our knowledge. But beyond the beverages, Preston had the opportunity to leverage the 3 years of Spanish he's acquired at Sunset Bridge. He also visited Tulum, saw the ruins, and learned about the Mayan society. Was educated on cenotes and was able to swim in the waters of these beautiful caves, enjoying the sights of the stalagmites. but perhaps his favorite experience was swimming with dolphins. All in all, Preston really expanded on his cultural knowledge, and with a trip to Taiwan coming up this spring, he'll have a chance to further his world. Now, we can only stop at ordering daiquiris at the restaurants in town, as he did this past Friday.
What I'm getting from that is personality over relatability. Anyone that has kids, you know, could write a letter like that. Not everybody could. No. And you said that was directing that at
Yes.
that's really lovely. That's great. What do you feel like you brought to that?
It's our family for fun. Watching us sitting at a bar where the opposite of pool. Hilarious.
Did you have fun writing that?
I did, yes.
We had fun. Comes across. We have more.
I got one.
Great.
This is, wrote this for the audience. Yes. So I went to Cleveland to visit Northwest Media headquarters, pitch tribe game with my coworkers. It was a short trip, 3 days. Also on the agenda was a barbecue at Dan's house. So that's back-to-back nights of drinking after work. Not wanting to get Bill and Craig in trouble for a three-day drinking spree with Jonesy, I decided to connect with an old coworker for night one. Brian suggested we go to Little Italy, and he made reservations at his favorite spot. I got there first, and the host looked at me like I was crazy to be there. Little Italy was a we were preparing for some festival that week. They didn't want to seat me, even though we had a reservation. Then he tells me they're all out of red sauce. No red sauce in an Italian restaurant? Do I believe them, or do they really smell it? But no, not like my face. Ryan arrived, and I told him the situation. He was in disbelief, but it seemed to be the deal. We sat down at the bar and couldn't even get a drink. We bailed and went to the next place. He thought there was a sports bar nearby. That place was long gone. So he suggested Mongolian barbecue. I hate those places. I'm not a fan of messing up my own meal. I can do that at home. I have no training on how to combine these ingredients, so why do they trust me? Who came up with this business plan? As we're walking towards Mongolian barbecue, I spot a sign that says burgers and beers. I told Ryan, that's the place. I love both of those things. We walk upstairs and I can't find the restaurant. The guy walks out and says, are you looking for the clubhouse? I said, no, I'm looking for burgers and beers. He says, oh man, the clubhouse is the old burgers and beers. Come on in and let me show you around. We walk in, there's no AC. It's 85 degrees in this place. Ryan and I stick out like sore thumbs. Manager walks us around the place. It's game night tonight. We got Jenga, Connect 4, he says. I says, you know, we'll just sit at the bar and grab a beer. We sit down. There's a DJ spinning. It's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. The DJ's in full tilt. We can't hear each other over the beats. Bartender comes over. Says, the bartender comes over and everything we order is not available. It's red sauce part 2. I settle for a Miller Lite bottle. Then the bartender looks us over and says, you guys know it's game night tonight? We got Uno, we got Jenga. I said, okay, cool. Ryan and I are trying to politely finish our drinks quickly so we can escape this place. I throw the American Express down and she grabs it. A third guy walks behind the bar and sees us. Fellas, welcome. I'm Marcus. It's game night tonight. Chefs. I look at Ryan and I say, I think if we leave here without playing one of these games, we might get our asses kicked. The American Express takes forever, but finally comes back. I look at the machine and my automated tip options are 3%, 5%, or 7%. I leave a 50% tip as a sorry, we're not playing your games. We went to the Mongolian barbecue. I messed it up.
What I'm getting from that, are you the kind of person that writes the way you talk?
Yes.
Okay. Lots of, yeah, that's a skill. That's, I mean, for some, most people sound completely different when they write than when they talk, and how they communicate every day. And a lot of that is we're putting on a writer voice sometimes. We're like, oh, this is my professional writing voice. And some people come across much better on the page than they do in real life. They get nervous, they're not effusive, they can be shy. And so for them, writing is a way to get it all down. But it's a real skill to be able to sound on paper the way you sound you're talking. That's really remarkable. That was great. I'm gonna let you guys go after this real quick, but I would encourage you all to share these with each other. I think it's great, fantastic, and I don't know if there's a way to put these on an email or on the web or something. Whoever was willing to share them, but I think these were fantastic. I would love to do all want to read these. So,
Put them in
yeah.
the private Facebook group.
If you're willing,
Toka members only.
I know not everybody wants to share their writing, but if you want to, I would encourage you to. I think fabulous. I'm going to read you one that I wrote real quick. It's short. This is the first 3 paragraphs of a story I'm writing for Texas Monthly. And the coolest thing I did in August was I visited a Bitcoin mine. And this is like a place where they have a bunch of computers and they mine cryptocurrency. They like make Bitcoin out of computer code, basically. And the challenge of this story for me is like, oh God, how do I explain that to anyone who doesn't know what Bitcoin is or a Bitcoin, like that was my challenge writing the rest of this for the first 3 paragraphs, just to kind of give you an idea of what it was like. It's a Bitcoin. The hot blast of face melting air wouldn't feel unfamiliar to any Texan who's turned on their car's air conditioning in late July. Furnace blast of suffocating 100-degree hot air is only unusual in that it's happening inside the Big Spring, Texas warehouse, where it's hotter indoors than the 92 degrees outside in full afternoon sunlight. There's also the buzzing, an incessant whir that is the collective shout of thousands of small computers spinning their bands in unison. Little computers called miners are doing their programmed job, crunching algorithmic code until they wear out a band or burn out a power supply, necessitating repair or replacement. They're reliable little workers, these miners of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. They sit clusters on racks, dozens per rack, hundreds per rack wall, about 4,000 total doing their thing, winding their wine, generating blasts of heat that must be routed, giant non-computer fans to vents far above the ceiling. It's a long story. Edit the help from the first round. I can already see like typos. Anyway, we're gonna go on a break, but those were really fabulous. I'm so glad I got to hear those and for a lot of the rest of you. This is great. So take a break. We'll come back and talk about podcasting. We're at, oh gosh, we only got a half hour to talk about podcasting. Podcasting section is much shorter than the writing section. We'll be fine. Get a drink, take a break. See you in it's been 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Minutes, so that's okay.
I know. Roll it all in. Yes. Right. I know what you Whenever I ask a question, I also forget, like, I never, whatever. I like to I know it's kind of a big subject. Really, right. Which can just be all evidence.
Or it can be nuts and drive through.
Yeah.
So excited.
Yeah, that's it.
That's so cool. Obviously, it's impressive for opening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. So you guys do obviously a lot of sports or.
Yes.
We have a lot of universities. Yeah, right. They
Welcome back.
Yeah, Florida is. Still play there. That's actually nice.
Okay, welcome back. We're gonna spend the rest of our time talking about podcasts. And when I say podcast, I'm really talking about video, animation, radio, anything where writing takes on a different form than on the page. So podcast, TV broadcasts, instructional animation even, I've seen a lot of that recently. Radio shows, unless they're completely freeform and improvised, they still require lots of writing. Good podcasts have tightly written, sharp introductions. They usually have some sort of outline that guides the pace and the content of each episode. They have smart marketing and strong social media content to spread the word of what they are and why you should listen. And because the market has become so oversaturated with podcasts, I mean, they were oversaturated when I was doing podcasts like 5 years ago, and it's only gotten more so. It gets harder and harder to stand out and compete with shows that have very high production values, celebrity guests. It's just harder to stand out and get listened. I've done a couple of podcasts, and the biggest surprise people seem to have when they start one is just how much work it is to get started. It is a lot of work. It's even especially doing something that's like a weekly podcast, and then getting beyond the first few episodes. It's a huge grind, and very, very few podcasts ever make it past those first few episodes, and even fewer podcasts make any money ever to justify that work. I think the last figure I saw was like 1% of the top podcasts ever make any money at all. And I think that it's less now because there's so many more podcasts than when I saw that figure. So it is very competitive, and there have to be other reasons to do a podcast besides making money. You're not going to make money probably unless you have sponsors and advertising. Like, you're probably not going to make money. So doing a podcast has to be for other reasons. Let's say you want to make one anyway. You want to beat the odds, even if you never ever expect to make a dime from it. Maybe you have a hobby that you want to talk about and share with the world. Maybe you have a client who thinks it would be good marketing to start a podcast and try to reach influencers. Maybe you're just passionate about the format and you think it would be fun to learn how to do it. So what are the steps involved? And I know some of the people that have already done podcasts or radio and kind of already know the deal. So bear with me, but yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of steps. So first, name, concept, and logo. A podcast needs a strong identity and an original name to remember. It needs a focus. Podcasts where people just get a bunch of friends together and blab for an hour. They were popular at one time, but people expect much more than that now. I mean, for example, 10, 12 years ago was when you could get away with, oh, let's just get my friends in a room and turn on the microphone and record it and send it out like that. Not anymore. Even in an audio medium, a podcast still needs a good logo and a visual identity that will stand out on iTunes, Spotify, social media, and on a website if you end up having one. These are the hosts of the Mother Runner podcast, which focuses on the challenges of staying fit and being in a running community while also raising kids. That's great. Like, that's a really great idea. It's very specific, but while also appealing to a huge number of people. So that's sort of the ideal, is like something that is real specific, could be niche, but also has a great audience or a core audience to build on. That's a really good example of sort of nailing the concept and nailing the audience. Gear and know-how. Some people get away with a USB microphone, a laptop, and a quiet room in their house to record a podcast. But for anything more than a hobby show, something you're just doing for fun, you really are going to need to get a mixer, several good quality microphones, a web host to host the podcast, or at least access to a studio where someone can engineer, record, and edit your show. A lot of people do it that way. People who don't want to mess with gear, don't want to mess with microphones and mixers, they rent a studio and go in, they record their podcast, someone else messes with the audio and records it, and sends them a nice, neat audio file that's already been cleaned up with music cues, and that's what they put out into the world. That's a perfectly acceptable way to do a podcast, is let someone else deal with all that stuff. But that's expensive. Like, that is not cheap for that way. Gear is expensive, but it is an investment, and the learning curve to do it all yourself is very high if you don't know how to do it. That's one reason why a lot of people do go the route of renting a studio or hiring someone who knows how to do audio. It's not easy to learn. It's a lot of patience, a lot of really why is this not sounding right? Why is this not sending out to my podcast feed? It's a lot of trial and error. Here's something else you need to structure and getting organized. Podcasts don't just happen. Really have to know how to stay organized. This is one way that writing comes into it. You need a script for your podcast, so it's not just an hour of meandering, unfocused chatter. You have to have a plan, even if you don't think you'll need it. This is what's called a podcast rundown, just sort of a very loose outline of like, this is where the show's going to go. These are the segments. This is what we're going to go from this to that. And really, it just gives you a direction. It gives you sort of some signposts so that you're not just, oh, wait, what are we doing next? Because even if you're really good on your feet, you don't think you need to stay organized. You really do, because podcast time runs differently than real time. If 30 minutes will run by before you even know it, and then all of a sudden you have a 2-hour podcast that nobody's listening to. So it really helps to stay focused, to stay organized. I used to set timers. I used to have either a laptop timer or an iPad in the room that would count down, and we would see, okay, our 5 minutes for that segment are up, and we'd have to either wrap it up or see it getting to the timer countdown. We go, oh, let's move on. So really keeping stuff on track is important, because when I'm up here right now talking, I have no idea what time it is. Like I only know because I'm right. Should your show have different segments with different topics and guests, or focus on one thing? Should it be 20 minutes long or closer to an hour? Length and structure are really key things to figure out before you ever record the first episode. You've got to figure out a format and how it's going to run and how it's going to be organized, because otherwise you're just going to be playing. You really got to decide that stuff up front. You want to have a plan for several episodes ahead. Don't launch a podcast until you have at least 3 or 4 episodes in the can and ready to go, because then you're going to be up against the wall like, oh no, this has to be done by tomorrow, and my guest dropped out and this fell through and the audio's not working. Like, really got to have a buffer of 3 or 4 weeks at least in the can where you launch it. And even then, like, those episodes will burn out fast, so that's stay ahead. And let's say you make a good podcast. Let's say you beat the odds, you found a good producer, a good niche, you did the work to launch your show, we put out a few episodes, we even got some listeners. Like, you're a success. But your job's not over. You still need to continue to grind that episode regularly or risk losing your listeners. Consistency is super important in podcasts. If you say you're a weekly show, you better put out a podcast every single week, or tell your readers, we're going on a break. And what a lot of shows do is they will do things in seasons. We're going to do 10 episodes of a season, and then we're going to take a long break, and then we're going to come back for 10 more and do it that way. If you promise your listeners you're going to put out an episode every week and you don't, they will stop listening. They will, where's the episode this week? I said every week. Where is it? If it's late, if it's not posted at the same time every week, when it normally is, people will complain. Like that is one thing with podcasts. Expect it to be there when you say it's going to be there, the same time every week, or if it's monthly, bi-weekly, whatever, just you have to have a schedule and stick to it and be consistent, because people will start to lose interest. Like, you're not taking it seriously. It's not there for them when they're ready to listen to it. I know people that, when Serial was popular, like that was one of the first big kind of breakout popular podcasts. People were on their phones that morning, Friday morning. Where is it? I need to hear that next episode. If people really take an interest in your podcast, they need it when you say it's going to be there. So if you can't do that, then I don't know what to tell you, but you gotta be consistent.
If you're thinking about starting a podcast but don't want to do it in perpetuity, would you recommend kind of the format of, say you're covering a topic, but you want to say ahead of time, like, I'm going to do an 8-episode series.
A limited
this
run
topic.
podcast is great. Like,
Yeah.
that's a great solution to the grind of it.
And saying it ahead of time too, right? Like on your first episode, like this
You
is
would
the
want to tell
first of
people
8 episodes.
this is a limited run. Even as I did one podcast last year that was a single serve 1 episode podcast. Like, it was just only ever going to be the 1 episode, and we were there to talk about Transformers the movie, which was a formative movie of my youth. And I got one of the producers of the new Transformers show on Netflix, the whatever the chief Transformers. Just happened to live in Austin, so I got him on the show to talk about that original movie and how it inspired the new show that's currently on Netflix. And then I talked to a musician who does 80s synth music in Austin. Her name is Morley Bishop. She goes by Primo the Alien. She's fantastic, by the way. Go on Spotify and subscribe to Primo the Alien. amazing. Does sort of synth 80s music, and she's super talented, one of the most talented people I know. Anyway, I got her on the podcast as sort of the voice of reason of like, this is terrible, it's a bad movie, this is horrible. But she loved the music and a lot of 80s rock music. She really vibed with that. So those were my two guests. And then we just talked about that movie for one episode. That was it.
Important question. What's the name?
I think it was called Dead Robots was the name of the podcast, because in that Transformers movie, they kill a bunch of Transformers. Like it was traumatizing. Like, these are my toys, these are my buddies, and they killed like half the cast of the Transformers in a very cynical way, because what they were doing was, oh, let's kill off all these Transformers, and then all these kids have to buy new Transformers.
Let's be honest, we only cared about one of them.
Optimus Prime, yes. The death of Optimus Prime still makes me cry. But how cynical is that? They were like, oh, these kids already bought all our toys. Let's kill the characters and make few robots and they'll have to buy the new one. And then they made a movie out of it. Anyway, yeah, Dead Robots is the name of the podcast. I don't even know if you can find it online. But yeah, single serve, limited run, which is great, because then you could do a season of that and then come back, with another season of something else. Like Serial does that. I mean, they would do one season of, a story, the Adnan Syed story, and then come back the next season with a whole other story, which didn't work out for them, because the second season they did was nowhere near as compelling as the first season. So that's a danger. But yes, limited run podcasts are totally a thing. And I actually encourage that, because then it's like you have a finish line. You have an ending. And there's nothing to say that you couldn't add a bonus episode. You could say, you know what, we have more material than we were able to get to in 8 episodes. We have one more bonus, and people will like throw a party for you. They'll be thrilled that you did a bonus episode. Oh my God, you did one more episode.
Yeah, Dolly Parton's America did that, and instead of tagging it on to the end, they actually put it in between, so it really kept people staying engaged with it. And I
People
like
love
that they added the
content.
extra content in the middle versus
Yeah.
at the end.
I have friends who do a podcast about television. I think I'm biased because they're close friends of mine, but I think it's the best podcast about TV out right now. It's called Extra Hot Great. And I think it's just, they've been doing it for a long time, and their production is amazing. They've been so long, and they know they're really good. And they cover a lot of ground in one episode. They do like 10 or 12 topics in one episode in 1 hour, and a game show, like a quiz show at the end of every episode called Game Time. They're amazing. For a while, what they started doing was they had the weekly flagship episode that they did every week. And then they started doing 4 mini episodes, so that every day you had something to listen to. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you had these short 3-5 minute episodes. And then on Friday, you had the 1 hour, long episode. And the mini topics were like just little mini topics of discussion, fun things like, what are top villains of TV right now? Or, they would just do little bits, and that would keep people engaged for the whole week. Now they don't do that, but they do a Patreon only, because they have Patreon subscribers who contribute to the show. So they do 1 extra episode a week that's just for Patreon subscribers. So you have, if you're a paid member, you get that extra episode. That's another way to do it. Like, keep one episode, keep a short version behind the paywall. And that's a good way to monetize. I think Patreon is a fun way to make money on podcasts, but it's basically like donation. That's how people follow the line. So exit strategy. That's a good exit strategy, is like make it a limited run. Another exit strategy is season, saying, we're only going to do 10 episodes and then take a break and then we'll come back next year or whatever. Or just ending it. There are a lot of podcasts that kind of had a good run, and when it became too successful or the host decided they wanted to go do something else, they just ended it. That was the Two Dope Queens podcast. They ended up with an HBO television show based on the podcast. And the 2 women who hosted it, they became so successful, they're like, well, we don't have time to do the podcast anymore. We're going to go do movies and TV and do other stuff. And so that was an example of like a podcast getting so popular that the hosts were just too in demand. So that happens sometimes too. So really, overall, is just plan ahead, like have an exit strategy or some sort of goal in mind. Like, do I want to just keep doing this every week forever, or do I want to, set a number of episodes and end it there, or do I want to kind of break the season? There's a lot of ways to do it, but just go into it knowing where the finish line is, how you want to break it up. Oh, here's our podcast running exercise. in 100 words, this is the last writing initiative, I swear. You're gonna talk about what podcast would you like to create, or at least a podcast that you'd like to listen to that doesn't exist. And in 100 words, I want you to pitch a name and a concept and tell us why people should listen and what your ultimate goal would be for the podcast. This could be a podcast for a client. This could be a podcast you want to do just for yourself. It could be a podcast that you think will make a lot of money and you actually want to do it. You're serious about it, and that's great. So if you don't care about podcasts or you don't have any interest in starting one, either pretend you do, or you know, like I said, tell us about a podcast that you would listen to. Maybe not one that you want to work on or create, but that you know that you're the audience for. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to brainstorm and actually 10 minutes to write, and that's going to wrap us up. So we'll do 15 minutes. Actually, I'm gonna give you more like 4 minutes because I'm gonna give you 5 minutes. So it's 1:47. 1:47. We'll move on to writing. If you have your idea and you want to just start writing, go ahead. Are there any questions about it? I'm sorry. This one's harder than the other ones, yeah. Okay, I have an alternate assignment. If you don't like podcasts, if you don't care about podcasts, you're doing, write 100 words on what you'd rather be doing than listening to or creating a podcast. That's your assignment if you don't like podcasts. Okay. Oh, and I'm gonna tell you a podcast pitch that I had that we never got to do, but I think it's still like the greatest podcast idea. So I'll tell you that like after I do or something. And that's about time for ideas, so I'm writing. Got about 3 minutes left. Okay, time to wrap it up. Let's hear some of your podcast ideas. Who wants to tell us about their fabulous podcast? Already that. Going over here.
Well, this is gonna show my age a little bit, but anyway. There are a number of podcasts that sound interesting, but I've never taken time to listen to them. Back in the 70s, when I was doing a weekly call-in radio show, I also recorded 7 days of trusty tips on gardening. Podcasts had not yet been discovered, but all the rules you listed for podcasts very much applied. They were 60 seconds in length. They all applied to gardening of some type. They sometimes had a theme that carried over for 2 to 7 days. They each also stood on their own.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm a big advocate for short, very short podcasts. I used to do a radio thing called Tech Minute Texas. That was just a 1 minute, like in 1 minute you would learn something about technology, some subject, and they ran those on the radio. And I was kept trying to turn them into a podcast, and it never happened. But short is good, like, and especially with so many podcasts out there, like we don't have time to listen to 3-hour podcasts, 4-hour podcasts. So always tighten it up. Yeah. We have one over here.
So this is actually something my friends think I should do. They want me to share my frugal tips and finds around town on a podcast or TikTok account. I'm always texting them about my latest Amazon find or the greatest new item at my go-to grocery store, Aldi. I can spend $40 on produce and groceries there that my friend could spend over $85 on at Whole Foods. I took that friend to Aldi and watched her jaw drop at the checkout as they ring up her organic produce items. My friends are always blown away when I find gas at an extremely lower rate or discover a BOGO deal that wasn't in the store's weekly ad. I also find quite amazing clothes at the local Goodwill, to the point that no one believes me when I tell them that's where I bought it. To prove my point, I took a friend to Goodwill and she got tears in her eyes when I put a Kate Spade satchel in perfect condition into her cart and told her that it was only $7.99. She wears it all the time now. So yes, I would love to create a podcast or some type of Cecilia's money saving tips if I could actually help someone.
That's there's a huge market around that as far as maybe Retail Me Not and was it Wallet, all these sites that are doing coupons. And I mean, I clip coupons, I do cashback, like all those deals, Amazon, Visa points, like all that. I'm really into that. I would listen to that. Do we have a couple more?
Okay, so in school, I actually had to do a podcast on this topic, and so I've been thinking about doing a series on this. But if I were to start a podcast, it'd be on different like short historical stories or legends that took place in Charleston. So like some examples would be how Edgar Allan Poe was stationed on Sullivan's Island in 1827 and potentially wrote his poem Annabel Lee about a girl he met there. Or which historical pirates tormented our harbors, murders, or ghost stories. Each podcast would probably be about 5 minutes in length, so very, very short and just a short summary of what happened. The name of the podcast would be Holy City Myths and Legends. So if you're interested in hearing or learning more about what makes Charleston such a fascinating place or enjoy historical legends, this podcast is for you. The goal of the podcast is simple storytelling and to help people learn more about my hometown.
That's a great niche, like that. Making it local is one good way to find your audience. What happened after I think Serial and then there was sort of boom in true crime podcasts was newspapers and TV stations were like, oh, we should do that. We one of those. And one of the most popular examples of that was the LA Times did Dirty John. And that became like a series of stories, but also a podcast, and then it became a TV show. With multiple seasons, so like that was a great idea. Like oh, we could do that, and the LA Times did it, and they had a huge hit with that. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution did one that I think it was called Breakdown. That was popular for Serial. Like that, Serial was really the inspiration for a lot of crime podcasts, and I think it sort of unleashed an appetite for that, and that's one of the most popular genres still right now is true crime.
I am a huge advocate of mental health. To me, something like in my personal time resources. So it's actually an idea that I already kind of had. But I want to start a mental health and neurodiverse resources podcast, working with neurodiverse individuals, thought work leaders, mental health professionals, and those overcoming mental illness through therapy and spirituality to spread awareness to resources. I think that many people don't have access to this information and resources or know where to start. And I think that using a podcast to spread more information while removing the stigma that asking for help is a sign of weakness makes it more possible. I think the benefit of listening is really for everyone. If you have mental illness, it helps you heal. And if you don't, you're better able to understand, empathize, and support your family and friends who are struggling, which is one of the most important things that I think mental illness takes on you, is you don't know how to ask for support and you don't get it. And the ultimate goal is to just raise the conscious awareness of mental health or diversity misconceptions and how those affect us as society. And I believe that when ourselves, we heal everyone by setting an example for what's possible.
Is that one thing that you really want to do?
Yeah, no, yeah, I actually have a website. Started a work town. So there's to kind of build resources for platforms for so yep, you didn't hear my friends in my hometown kind of just started a nonprofit called Love Your Community. So we're working with different people to kind of give a platform for things like this. And so I did a vendor event last August. That was one of the things I was going to write in that other exercise. But yeah, so I think that that's something I'm doing, and eventually kind of want to reach out to different influencers. And I've been talking with my own therapist and just friends who also go to therapy, because I just think, yeah, it's really important. And I know I have a lot of friends who maybe grew up in less privileged areas, and what I'm realizing through my growth is how important it is for them to have access. Like a lot of them didn't graduate high school, or they, you know, there's things that I say and they don't know what I'm talking about half the time. So just taking these kind of complex concepts and breaking them down into very digestible kind of, you know, there's like Instagram artists who create graphics, anyway, just like mental health resource graphics and stuff like that, that actually helped me a lot. But yeah, I think that's something that's really important to me.
So that's good. Good luck to you. It's really, it's hard to get started, but when you're passionate about the subject, you just really want to. The podcast that I did for the Statesman, I was so passionate about it. Like it was my favorite thing to do at work. Like I would much rather be doing podcasting than recording and writing. So like I threw my heart into that. You know, we did it for about 5 years, and I loved that podcast. That was the hardest thing about the Statesman. So like, oh, I can't keep doing the podcast. It's like I can't take it with me. So that kind of broke my heart, was having a podcast behind. You really care about it, and you're passionate about it. All the stuff that I describe, all those steps, like feel like organic, like you want to do the marketing, you want to do social media work, you want to tell people about it. It makes a big difference when you actually care about what you're putting out there, and you want more people to, rather than just like, oh, we got to do this thing. I don't know, do you listen to Esther Perel's podcast? Esther Perel, she's a, I guess, Belgian psychotherapist. If I'm getting that wrong, please let me know. She might be a psychiatrist. But she records therapy sessions, and that's the podcast. And the participants, you know, they know that they're being recorded. They're anonymous, like they don't give their real names. But it's like couples therapy and families, and like it's so good. It seems so raw and great, and she's just brilliant. It's amazing. And we were lucky enough to have, she was visiting Texas for the Texas Conference for Women. And we were lucky enough to just have it in town, and we snagged her for our podcast, and we got to talk to her for our podcast called I Love You So Much. And she's just as impressive in person as on the podcast. She's, look her up. I mean, if you're not listening to, it's called Where Shall We Begin? The name of the podcast. Esther Perel, she's like a rock star in the counseling world. She's really great. I think we have one more. Maybe? I can go, sure. Okay.
So I wrote this, I wrote this in the format of that it's a commercial for the podcast. So, you know, like at the beginning or middle or end of the podcast, there's the commercial breaks. So think of this like a commercial that you can't skip through every 15 seconds. For those that enjoy sports, and even for those that don't, it's clear that there's much more to learn than just the rules and physical skills. Sports teach us about friendship, leadership, perseverance, entrepreneurship, justice, and even ministry. In the podcast Sports And, guests tell their stories of how their love of sports has spilled over into other aspects of their lives. How does being a football coach help you teach high schoolers? How does a love of baseball lead you to open a baseball-themed brewery? Find out the life impact of sports on the Sports And podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm gonna tell you real quick the one that I had mentioned before, which was we had a restaurant critic in my newspaper named.
You did,
I
went
wanna-
over the 3
I don't want to
sentences
give you all
earlier.
the lunch. That's what I'm
Just a little background, in addition to TurfNet, I'm a part-time worker at T-Ball Stadium, which is our MLS team in Cincinnati. Brand new stadium, and like many stadiums across the country, was built in an area that was kind of suffering and had seen better days. And we reach out to the local students and people in the community to have them work with us, and I'm pleased to have about 12 or 15 local high school students working with me for each game. And my idea for a podcast, because so many of these stadiums have gone in and they've built new housing and so forth. To interview some people so that history can be preserved, and perhaps contrast that within the same podcast with the current residents and the people that are making a new life for themselves within these neighborhoods. Because these neighborhoods were very vital, and have some vitality, had seen better days. Then this development comes in, and now there's the promise of more success, but just to kind of bridge that generational gap between the people that were living in these neighborhoods for generations and the new developments and the new things that are happening.
That's great. It's great. And again, like localized and how you put it right there. I'm gonna tell you real quick this idea, and then we'll wrap up. We had a restaurant critic at my newspaper named Matthew Odom, still writes. If you're ever visiting Austin, read his reviews because he's an amazing critic. He goes to all these restaurants, writes his reviews. My idea for a podcast was we had a Metro reporter named Andrea Ball, who's that award-winning investigative journalist, super funny. She's hilarious. I always wanted to have her on the podcast. A live wire, super funny, great personality. My idea for the podcast was, and she was open to this, and we just never did it. Andrea would review Matthew Odom's leftovers from the restaurant reviews that he was doing. So he brings home leftovers, she eats the leftovers the next day, and then she would write reviews of the leftovers. She would podcast reviews of the leftovers. Because that's the best part of eating a restaurant. You can take it home, and the next day sometimes it's even better. It tastes sometimes it's way worse. So reviews of leftovers from Matthew Odom. Matthew did not like the idea. He was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And then this was pre-COVID, so that was the other. Anyway, we're gonna wrap up here real quick, and I think it's a lunch next.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So wrapping up, strategies for success. We're gonna go real quick. Be authentic, interesting, and have fun whenever possible. If you're writing, we saw a lot of that today. People were having fun. Writing, being authentic and interesting. I think we all have that in you. Know what you're writing for, who you're writing for, and who you want to write for, no matter what medium. Your ideal audience might not be who you're writing for now, but you should definitely shift in that direction. You want to be reading. Who is your real target? It might not be reading right now, so be about that. Be kind to yourself. Your writing won't always be great. It gets better the more you practice. As I was reading that Texas monthly piece to you all, I was noticing 10 things that I'm like, oh, I can change that. That's not good. Oh, that sentence is way too long. I mean, I am constantly self-editing as I'm, even after I've sent something in, I'm still like, oh, that I need to change that. That's too long. So be kind to yourself because it's never going to be perfect on the first draft. That's why we revise. That's why we have editors. And that's it. So thank you all for being here and indulging me. I hope some of this was useful and that you're you're all welcome to email me or connect with me on social media. Some of you already did connect with me on I saw on the break. But yeah, I'm welcome to any questions you have, or if something I talked about wasn't clear, I'm happy to help or advise further. So that's my Twitter, my email, and my LinkedIn that I'm pretty active on. So yeah, connect with me and have a great rest of the conference and lunch. Thank you for having me.